Dr. Patrick suggested that I give you 4 main points straight off the top, and here they are. The American tradition of liberty of conscience is not well understood. That's point 1. It's not complicated, it's not hard to understand, but it's not paid attention to. Instead, people talk about other things. Talk about religion, talk about morality. Second, it's not just your conscience that's under attack, it's this tradition. Third, the usual defenses of conscience rights that I hear are not going to work because they have no traction. What does have traction is your own tradition, which supports many of the things that you've heard already this morning. It has traction if you use it, if you don't distort it. So let me explain. The question that I was asked to offer thoughts on is, how can you defend your right of conscience in a way that has traction in the secular world? I want to look at 4 different answers that are being given to this question by religious Americans under pressure to violate their conscience. At first, I want to note that there are 2 different ways of registering this question. One is to hear it as asking, what can we say to end these pressures in the field of medicine to do what we consider wrong? It's these in-your-face demands that are threatening you most directly. So it makes some sense to hear the question in this way, but there's also something going on behind your back. It's not just that within medicine your rights are being infringed, it's also that the First Amendment protection set in place to put a stop to such infringement is under attack itself. Now don't take my word for this, I'm no expert, I'm Canadian. But listen to some of the people who are. Douglas Laycock has been called a towering figure in religious liberty, not just because that has been the focus of his academic career, but for testifying on these issues before Congress in the courts, including the Supreme Court. He authored an amicus brief in defense of Hobby Lobby. In an article that I recommend to all of you, the link is in your program, Professor Laycock writes, scholars from all points on the spectrum now question whether there is any modern justification for religious liberty. That is, it's not just that certain people are pushing you on the stairs, it's that the railing that protects you from falling is also being removed. In other words, you might wish to answer this question by appealing to your standing right to religious liberty, but if that railing is under as much attack as you are, you'll really have to mount a defense of religious liberty itself and not just call in its support. Isn't the most vital question then, how can you defend the right of conscience of any person of faith in a way that has traction in the secular world? This question needs an answer. You might say that you can't deal with any bigger issue than what's going on in your profession, but here's my point. It might be that you will get more traction by going larger and defending the very right. What I plan to do then is, in part 2, to run through 4 ways of fighting the assault on conscience. Some of these ways seem very misguided to me, but you will decide. I would make this part 1, but for the fact that you can't evaluate anything intended to do a certain job, in this case, defend your right of conscience, until you've looked at the real world conditions in which that tool has to do its work. Here's a lovely looking tire. But is it a good tire? Is this a good medicine? Well, you can't talk about the virtues of these things, look at them aesthetically, or talk about the design theory. You can do that, but you can't talk about the virtues of these things. No virtues here to speak of until we have asked, what are the conditions these things are going up against? What temperatures are we talking about? Who's the patient? And what is this medicine for? And are these good against those things? I point out the obvious here, because when we're talking about ideas, arguments, this intelligence often just vanishes completely. we don't tend to answer the question, how can you defend your right of conscience, by looking at the second part of this sentence, which has to do with those real-world conditions in which our ideas get received. We often just launch into what we want to say, what matters to us. Well, what pleases us is as irrelevant in defending your rights as it is in designing tires and medicines. Part one, which I turn to now, gives a bit of sorely needed attention to the new conditions in which we find ourselves today. An attack on the principle of freedom of conscience itself is a rather different circumstance than an assault on your rights within medicine. Stephen Smith, author of The Rise and Decline of American Religious Freedom, is another expert on religious liberty who says the same thing as ACOP. The traditional commitment to religious freedom seems more embattled today and more vulnerable than at any time in the modern period. But a person might read these claims and say, come on, and think this is maybe a little exaggerated. If you think that religious liberty is fairly safe, well, that's one set of conditions, and you can pick arguments for those conditions. But if you are wrong, if the conditions are much tougher, if you need a tire for sub-zero conditions, then you better change your thinking, because the arguments that you will start crafting are too light for the job. And here again is my first point. People today do not even understand religious liberty. It can sound like they're fierce defenders of this principle, when in fact they can say hardly anything in its defense that will stand up in the current weather, the assault on conscience rights mentioned by Laycock and Smith. I want to prove this to you with the example of a president. In 1993, President Bill Clinton signed into law the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. What this law basically says, said Clinton, is that the government should be held to a very high level of proof before it interferes with someone's free exercise of religion. RFRA is an application of the First Amendment, and Clinton talks about the importance of the First Amendment and the fact that we have kept faith with it for 200 years. That would help make my point if I read you all of Clinton's glowing words on this freedom, but let me quote only 3 lines more. We all have a shared desire here to protect perhaps the most precious of all American liberties, religious freedom. Today, Americans have created a climate in which some people are embarrassed to say that they advocate a course of action simply because they believe it is the right thing to do, because they believe it is dictated by their faith, by what they discern to be, with their best efforts, the will of God. Let us never believe that the freedom of religion imposes on any of us some responsibility to run from our convictions. Let us instead respect one another's faiths, fight to the death to preserve the right of every American to practice whatever convictions he or she has. And notice that Clinton says practice, not worship, as his wife has since chosen to say, but practice. And when you hear such admiration for this tradition, you should be asking yourselves, why? Why does Clinton believe in this? When he speaks about the importance of the First Amendment and keeping faith with it, what are his reasons for calling this important? And what I propose to you is that you have in this speech lofty rhetoric, but very weak support for this precious principle, and virtually no sign of its importance. Talk of a precious liberty might persuade you that, contra those scholars, the traditional commitment to this freedom is not embattled. But let me show you how wrong you would be. First, notice one striking irony. If we go back to the origins of the principle of freedom of conscience to look at how religious liberty was defended then, go back to William Jefferson Clinton's namesake, Thomas Jefferson, you get a defense like this. Almighty God hath created the mind free, and manifested his supreme will, that free it shall remain, by making it altogether insusceptible of restraint, that all attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burdens, or by civil incapacitations, tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and meanness, and our departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, who being Lord both of body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercions on either, as was in his almighty power to do, but to extend it by the influence of reason alone. Here's an answer to the question I asked about Clinton. Why do people defend the cause of religious freedom? Note Jefferson's answer. Why religious freedom? Because it's God's plan to have people decide for themselves, without coercion, what is true and what is right. That's hard to argue with. And here's the irony. That way of answering has been ruled out by the First Amendment, by the very amendment protecting religious freedom, or by that amendment as it has come to be interpreted. Why? As ACOP notes, the Supreme Court's requirement that laws have a secular purpose can be read to rule religious arguments out of bounds. And in the pivotal case he cites here, the Supreme Court said that a state could not use religious schools in its program without violating the First Amendment. And this case has delivered the standard by which all subsequent statutes involving church-state interactions have been judged. Now, Laycock says, I think that secular requirement is substantially overread, but he agrees that if the Supreme Court has gone too far in requiring that laws have a secular purpose, it nevertheless has required this. So note the irony. The very amendment set into the Constitution to enshrine the free exercise of religion would not allow Bill Clinton in 1993 to say what Jefferson said. That can't be a reason given by any public official. Even if Clinton believed, as I believe, that the mind was made by God to be free, he could not have included that justification in his reason for endorsing RFRA, even though his remarks that day included the words, "Let us never believe that the freedom of religion imposes on any of us some responsibility to run from our convictions." I point out this irony, which was noted by Smith, not to entertain you with some cute point, but to flush out the fact that this talk of keeping faith with perhaps the most precious of all American liberties, religious freedom, to quote Clinton, is a bit hollow and misleading. Smith writes, the classic rationales for religious freedom, because they were and are theological in nature, are thought by many to be inadmissible for purposes of public justification. Secular substitutes are proposed, but these are of doubtful efficacy. A point I think made by Dr. Nash. Increasingly, therefore, theorists gravitate to the conclusion that there is no justification for giving special protection to religious freedom. I'm not saying anything so foolish as we have to be allowed to make a theological defense again. Rather, I want to dispel the illusion of deep governmental support for the principle of religious liberty. If you really had the very freedom that Clinton describes, you wouldn't have to look for some secular reason for justifying it. But it is important to face the fact that something has indeed happened to this freedom. Does the justification of freedom of conscience offered by Jefferson have traction in the secular world? No. The argument we need has to be fit to these conditions, where both theological and other arguments, as I intend to show you now, have no grip. It's a justification with traction that we need. I think is available in your tradition, but I hear very few people talking about it. What justification can we use today to defend liberty of conscience? Let's get our answer from Clinton's remarks and see how that flies. Why did Clinton think we should protect religious thought? By my count, he gave 5 reasons, hinting at a 6th. Listen to these reasons and hear how they play today. First, he spoke of the historic role that people of faith have played in the history of this country. But today, people say, fine, that was true. When Christians were surrounded by other Christians, Christianity was highly beneficial. But America today has lots of non-Christians, and Christians have started to impede and hinder the liberties of their fellow citizens. Why should we be concerned about not impeding or hindering religious liberties when supporting those liberties means impeding or hindering the liberty of other Americans to have access to legal health services. Second, Clinton said, the framers cared a lot about religion. But today people say, indeed they did. But increasingly, more and more Americans care about religion less and less. And what should rightfully follow from that? Third, Clinton said, this was the first freedom, which originally sparked the Bill of Rights. But today people say, do we really need to give religion a free hand to hold on to the Bill of Rights? I don't think so. It's nice that religion played this role, thank you, religious freedom, but now you've served your purpose. Fourth, Clinton said that the framers knew that religion helps to give people the character without which a democracy cannot survive. But people say this. Historically, sure, religion helped. It was a factor. But what leads the way to democracy in one age and later start chipping away at it, and religious liberty today is a barrier to the fundamental rights of others, to the provision of services that we have evolved to provide to people who have no moral trouble with these services. And fifth, Clinton said that religious people have bolstered the most central institution of our society, the family. Religious institutions have brought forth discipline, community, and responsibility, and enabled us to live together. And what do people say to that? Great, let them live their Norman Rockwell dream. I grew up in it, some will say, and I'm grateful, but it's not for me. There are other ways to live in America. And as for that enabling us to live together stuff, they're not enabling us to live together today because they're withholding legally accepted medical services from me that I have no objection to. All of these 5 claims get a swift put down today as defenses of freedom of conscience. And my question to you is, what do you say is the justification for this principle? What will you use to defend it? If you want to defend your right of conscience in a way that has traction in the secular world, is there anything for you in any of these answers? You might like some of the things that Clinton says, but it's not going to help you with this. ACOP writes that the guarantee of religious liberty, freedom for the religious, for a special group, and what makes it special, not to obey regulations that apply to others, sounds like a 2-tier society. By claiming religious liberty as a right only for themselves, religious people help confirm the non-believer's view of religious liberty as just another special interest demand. So this is my point in this first part. The railing that America has supposedly kept faith with for 200 years. People are suggesting we get rid of it. Hearing about this dismantling, were you to say, come on, this would be very foolish if you were not holding in your hand a convincing reason to leave the barrier alone, a reason that means something to the people who are showing up to remove it. Says Laycock, the religious community cannot take religious liberty for granted. It needs to spend a lot more energy defending the right to religious liberty. And that is our question now. Defend it how? What is the reason that liberty of conscience matters so much? If you are answering this with reasons that play well in your head, but that evaporate when handed to others, then you're really encouraging that dismantling, reinforcing the sense of unjustified privilege. If no one could give you a good reason to stop removing what you call a public hazard, would you stop? Now, the time I have left, I can do no more than take you very quickly through 4 ways of defending freedom of conscience, 4 ways of answering this key question. Note that if you choose to hear the question in the first way, what can we say to end these practices in medicine to violate conscience? If you focus on the specific restrictions you are facing, which might seem more manageable, you will not do anything to defend the right to religious liberty. In picking the smaller fight, you may find yourself counting on this right, leaning on it, but leaning on the railing stops no one from dismantling it. For instance, you might pick this smaller question and answer like this. You can say, look, let's rely on the existing RFRA-type legislation or RFRA-type defense that was based on the First Amendment. You might say, let's use the kind of test that RFRA set in place, the compelling interest, least restrictive means test. After all, you can say, this saved Hobby Lobby, and that is true. So what does this mean? This test says, you have a straightforward claim to liberty if, when the government, or maybe it's an institution, has a compelling interest in seeing that services you wish to be exempted from are provided, you have a straightforward claim to liberty if there's some less restrictive way of serving that interest than forcing you to violate your conscience by providing it. If there is, then you are left alone. So the first answer is this. We should argue that there's a better way to serve the interest in providing these health services than violating our conscience. That's what the lawyers will do. 4 very quick points on this answer, on relying on this test. First, in saying this, you aren't arguing anything about rights, are you? You're talking about means of serving the interest of delivery of service, and maybe that will help you, but it's a different issue from religious liberty entirely. Second, Hobby Lobby won in the Supreme Court only because, says Laycock, quote, they found a solution in which no one was going to be burdened. So you might win, but you might lose, because winning seems pretty circumstantial. I mean, in how many of these cases is there going to be an available solution in which no one is burdened? Which leads me to wonder this third point, why do you have rights only where there's no burden on anyone else? I don't see that in the First Amendment. Why should your freedom of conscience be recognized only when a competing interest can also be accommodated? I don't understand that as freedom at all. I agree that no one gets a free pass. There's no liberty from law on account of religion. Actions, whatever their source, are subject to law, which used to mean the basic demands of public order. But how does every last regulation turn into a compelling interest of public order? The thing that's counted sacrosanct here is not your conscience, but this interest. Why? Some state's or administrator's assessment that some harm it identifies, limitation of access to service. Must under no circumstances because. Why is that sacrosanct? Where's that in the First Amendment? And fourth, pay some attention to the whole conflict. You may separate your issues, where the harm you're charged with is self-interest, failure to be neutral arbiters of medical care, quite different from, say, opposition to same-sex marriage, where the harm is discrimination. Not at all the same, you say. Well, it's not clear that your opponents care about this distinction. Obstructing a constitutional right to abortion, obstructing a constitutional right to marriage, these are both violations of human rights. This is how it is playing in Canada, and it is this civil rights issue that destroyed the coalition that put together RFRA. The opposition is doing everything it can to have religious liberty endorsed as, understood as, religious liberty understood as, quote, religious bigotry. A free pass to burden other people with your values, while evading all recognition of their human rights. In the audience here today, we might have many people who want Christian values upheld in the law, marriage seen as one man and one woman, abortion seen as killing. You also want freedom to be a doctor and provide health care that is moral. Same people might well wish for all these things. But is it clear to onlookers which of these things you get if your rights of conscience are honored? What I'm suggesting is that what you're fighting for in medicine is recognition of your First Amendment right to exercise your religion and refuse improper demands on you. I agree with Laycock. The right to believe a religion but no right to act on it would be a hollow right indeed. Your not asking in this for the right to control other people's sex lives. There's a big difference between the free exercise of religion for individuals, you doing God's will in your own life, you free to give your own uncoerced response to matters of right and wrong, and the legislation of morality, you constraining others to do God's will with the coercion of legal punishment. But the opposition isn't interested in marking this difference. You may not be willing yourself. But the less we distinguish these things and cover them both with the mantle of religious liberty, the more we intensify the opposition to everything. What do these signs say to your opponents? That opposition will do all that it can to paint you as an oppressor. And if your case can be parsed as a case of discrimination, of religious bigotry, a free pass to impose your values on other people, then you will lose. Because in cases of discrimination, says ACOP, who knows the legal history, the religious side always loses. He's just talking about the case history. Take the case of the New Mexico wedding photographer sued for not photographing a same-sex ceremony. Admittedly, not your sort of case. New Mexico has a state RFRA, and when the RFRA standard was applied, ACOP says, quote, 12 different judges heard that case as it worked its way up from the Human Rights Commission to the state Supreme Court, and the religious wedding photographer did not even get a single vote from a single judge in support of religious freedom. So on this answer, counting on RFRA seems to me like falling for a bait and switch. This least restrictive means test is less than you were promised in the First Amendment. If the question is deeper than how can we stop these people from pushing us on the stairs, or if it is not, if the question is that, or how can we stop the evisceration of the First Amendment, the repudiation of the American tradition of religious liberty, either way, you need something better than that RFRA strategy. If that answer doesn't offer any defense of religious liberty, the answer we'll look at now does. How can you defend liberty of conscience in a way that has traction in the secular world? By showing those who oppose it how wrong they are. We have to show them first that religion is a fundamental good. It is a basic human good because the defense of religion follows. Second, that it is right to act on conscience because the defense of the deep importance of a clear conscience follows. Third, that you are justified in being entirely and categorically against abortion because scientifically your case for seeing an embryo as a human being protected by law follows. These are the things we have to show according to this answer. What's the plan here? Show them that you are right on everything that bears on your issue. All these good things are under attack, so you repulse that attack by correcting all the mistakes your opponents have made about the importance of religion, the centrality of conscience. How? You correct them by bringing your opponents back to the fundamentals of right and wrong. Let me give you an example. In a book titled The Crisis of Religious Liberty, Robert George, the practical reason, direct our choosing toward what is rationally desirable because they are humanly fulfilling. This is the natural law perspective that Dr. Nash mentioned. So what Professor George advises is, for instance, that you should make the case that freedom of religion is essential for a person's spiritual well-being. But notice a few pages further on, he happens to say this, that among our opponents, quote, regard for a person's spiritual well-being has been the premise and motivating factor for denying religious liberty. In other words, your opponents believe in spiritual well-being too, and that's why they're fighting you. You are standing in the way of the pursuit of happiness. I mean, think about it. When we talk about fundamental aspects of human well-being, do you think they say, no, we want human unwell-being? When we advocate basic human goods, do they say, no, basic human evils? Of course not. When they say that an active sex life or choice as to whether to be a mother is a fundamental part of human well-being. They're talking about basic goods and what is humanly fulfilling in their eyes. We put forward our good, they counter with theirs. So here's my question. How does Professor George propose that we put that move out of commission? Where does he think that we can get traction? And his answer is reason. Why not go straight to the top and give them what Professor George calls God's reasons? On another occasion, he remarked, "We believe that God is a God of justice who cares what the public policy of our society is on morally significant questions. For example, abortion, euthanasia, etc. And a great many believers believe, as I do, that God wills that the unborn be protected by law. But we also believe that there are reasons for these policy positions and that these reasons are God's reasons for willing what he wills." So this then is the second answer. Argue the fundamentals by countering the opposition's fundamentals with powerful reasons. So we should say, no, an active sex life is not the true means to genuine sexual fulfillment. Sex in the context of a secure family committed to raising a new generation, that is a basic good, etc., etc., etc. I'm very unconvinced by this answer. If this is the plan, show them that they are wrong fundamentally about the good. Embark on this, and what are you doing now? You're fighting on every front, not just for religious liberty. In this plan, your actual objective is to convert them to another way of life. And if this is the means by which you defend religious freedom, I think you have it backwards. You've picked a hard thing to do a much easier thing. At one point, ACOP makes a very interesting remark. The pro-life side wants to eliminate abortions. The pro-choice and gay rights groups want conservative believers not just to leave them alone, but to affirmatively assist with abortions and same-sex relationships, or else leave any occupation that might ever be relevant. In this respect, these battles are like the religious battles of the 16th century. Each side wants to eliminate or repress the other. He adds, fortunately, today's battles are wholly unlike the wars of religion in their repudiation of violence. But the violence issue is not the thing to focus on. Laycock's main point is, this answer is, end their assault by winning them over. Win by engaging in a war of conversion, by argument. And we have been there before. Protestants and Catholics strove in centuries past to bring those who were wrong to the truth, but set aside the bad ways in which they went about this and concentrate only on the good ways and look at it simply practically. There was not a lot of conversion. This is our area of expertise. Your faith, you are saying, is a matter of conviction. Even your place on the map of Christianity, if you're a Christian, is a matter of conviction. The secular outlook, in that respect, is really no different. And we find that there's not a lot of play in such a mechanism. With no piece in this machine really able to move very much, all this pressure to move and continual spring winding just adds tension to the mechanism. And it's not wrong to say that freedom of religion arose as a way to vent all that tension. To the extent that this answer encourages us to make these arguments as often as possible so as to bring the other side around, I draw your attention, in the light of strategy, to this parallel between deadlocked convictions then and now, and ask one thing. How are you going to stop the dismantling of this railing now, if this is your plan? What is the modern justification for religious liberty? Here's the third answer. We should show them that respect for a person's conscience is a non-negotiable. Specifically, we have to show either that a religious person's convictions of moral wrongdoing are fundamental to his or her faith and must not be undermined, or that deeply held convictions must be recognized. Where should we start to make this case for conscience, this particular case? Why not with what conscience is? Theologian Paul Tillich wrote, The basic character of the conscience, the consciousness of guilt, is obvious. Christian doctors certainly believe in guilt, consciousness of wrongdoing, and they're very important things to say in their work. But at the same time, this guilt is problematic in the eyes of others when it means that you will start reducing patient access to certain legal medical services to avoid having this guilt. We have then two conflicting interests, or two kinds of harm. And in Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms asks judges to balance these interests. The interest of avoiding personal guilt. Are there other ways you could avoid it? Maybe by avoiding certain areas of medicine, versus the public interest in guaranteeing medical services. You can see where this is going. So your job here, if this is your answer, is to prove to people how important it is to serve this interest over the other, to prove that your interest is more weighty, prove how great the harm of violating conscience is to them, so that this balancing can be done correctly. And in addition, you'll have to show why you should also have the right to practice medicine in the area of your choice, because having you leave has struck many people as the obvious way to avoid this harm, which you want to do. Now, on the issue of getting traction, how do you think this consciousness of guilt plays in the eyes of your opponents? Your duties are real. Is this guilt equally real? Or is it maybe an aberration, a very impractical holdover from the past? I agree totally with anyone who says there's much that we can say about the reality of guilt. But do you realize that the sector we are arguing in here is morality? You must accept as an axiom on the time we live in that you and those oppressing you inhabit two different moral worlds. I'd like the opportunity today to say much more, but I can expand on this topic at length. I just ask you this. When in the past you have argued that morality is objective, that is, that there is a moral law set in place for all people, and you have given good reasons in support of this, or when you have seen experts argue this much better than you could, is it your experience that liberal America, let's call it that, tends to come around? Or do these people laugh this off as antiquated thinking? Well, when you press them to give consciousness of guilt its proper weight, it is a moral argument that you will be making. And my question is, why do you think this moral argument will convince them when all those other moral arguments just hit the concrete wall of their morality? We believe that we are living in a world that has rejected traditional moral values, while at the same time thinking that we can make moral arguments to guarantee the acceptance of traditional morality. This makes no sense. If this is your answer, you are really slipping back to the strategy of conversion on this one point. You are pitching the fortunes of religious liberty to your ability to make your opponents fall in line with your way of thinking. What is the chance that you will succeed in convincing people to whom, says Laycock, the harm of violating conscience now appears only as private pain? Couldn't you put up with a little pain, they ask, for the sake of your fellow man? Conscience as moral conflict is one part of the issue, but if this is your answer, there's a second feature of the way conscience is understood that you will also have to address. Conscience as something private and personal. How does conscience operate? You know what your duty is because of a deeply felt internal experience of the absoluteness of that duty. Well, if this is your answer, won't you have to find a way to convince them that their deeply held inner convictions, that medical services needed by women should always be available, are somehow trumped by your deeply held inner convictions? How will you argue this? You will inevitably be moving back to that second answer, arguing that your fundamentals are more fundamental. In my view, a trap is set for you here. Do not fall into the modern trap of subjectifying conscience in this way. This is the basis of postmodern values in the postmodern worldview. Are any particular values trump? No. So how could you possibly prove that yours are? Again, your strategy here will be converting them to a different morality. Can that work? When I associated conscience a moment ago with deeply felt internal and individual experience, I used words that should worry you. I lifted them straight from a recent Canadian bill, defeated but that our new Prime Minister has promised to bring back. Gender identity means the individual's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond with the sex that the individual was assigned at birth. This is what gender in Canada may soon be based on by law. The person who may use the women's washroom is a person who has a deeply held belief that they are female. If you choose to defend religious liberty with this answer, you have psychologized conscience in such a way as to buttress their position. This is their understanding of conscience, not yours. Let me give you one brief illustration of the acceptance of this understanding of conscience from an academic thesis on, get this, the meaning of conscience. This author defines the situation of conflict over conscience as the individual who stands against the state on grounds of a deeply held personal position and the state which demands compliance with its will. Conscientious objections, he says, stem from categorically held positions on both sides. He also throws in the view we just looked at, conscience as moral conflict. Conscience is the inner lawgiver, a man's judgment of good and evil. These terms are not favorable to you. If this is conscience, then what happens when you dig in your heels and assert your absolute? Why should your deeply held personal position carry any weight, especially when the state or the institution or the administration has a categorically held position that is by definition a little broader than personal, since it is concerned with societal good? Don't answer the question in this way and let your First Amendment rights depend yet again on your success in converting Catholics to Protestants, if you hear what I'm saying. In convincing others of the truth you see to be true. That's not the basis on which you have those rights. Just as you accept a neutered First Amendment if you settle for RFRA, here you will just concede defeat if you settle for this truncated conscience so popular today. And what is tragic in your case is that anyone who accepts this dual definition of conscience shows that he or she has lost the understanding of conscience laid out by the framers of the Constitution. Laid out to avoid the very trouble you are having. What is the answer we are looking for? You must defend the understanding of conscience held by the framers of the Constitution. You must defend their understanding. You may indeed think that you're doing that. Who wouldn't? All of these answers are ways of defending the free exercise of religion named by the framers, but we've paid no attention to the framers' understanding of conscience. And these three answers show it. First, you see in these answers a consistent tactic of secularizing, psychologizing, reliance upon universal reason, recourse to the secular RFRA standard. But what the framers mean by conscience does not make or need to make this massive concession. It undercuts this issue. Second, some of these answers narrowly identify conscience with religion or with morality in a way the framers never did, as I intend now to show you. Why does that matter? Tie conscience to a specific understanding of morality, one with absolutes. And how are you going to argue conscience in a moral way without invoking absolutes? Tie conscience to a morality with absolutes, or to religion at all, and you tie it to something that is not in the worldview of your chief opponents. Tie conscience to belief, as the framers did, and you were talking about everyone's business. What is the framers' idea of conscience? I want to make 2 points about it, and I believe you can find here the answer you are looking for. First, conscience, even in the First Amendment, is not fundamentally about religion, but it does fundamentally protect religion. So you have You have doubts. So let me show you this. If you had asked the framers, would it be okay if we legislated not a religion, but a philosophy for America? Americans will be Stoics, or Emersonians, or pragmatists. None of which is a religion, so we're not talking about a law respecting an establishment of religion. What would they have said? No, they would have said, no, what's wrong with you? Don't you understand what we did in the First Amendment? But that's about religion, you say. Yes, they answer. Shorthand for your most fundamental beliefs. Does the First Amendment protect the person who professes no faith? They ask you. Yes, you answer. Bill Clinton said yes. He said, we have enshrined in our Constitution protection for people who profess no faith. That is what the First Amendment is all about. Well, say the framers, that man doesn't have any religious beliefs. He thinks there's no God. He just has beliefs about religion. And they are protected. So it is beliefs that are protected, not just the beliefs of the religious. So you can see why I say that the First Amendment is not fundamentally about religion, but it does fundamentally protect religion. Second, what the framers meant by conscience was not restricted to the religious and was not just consciousness of guilt. When John Adams spoke up for liberty of conscience on all subjects and the right of free inquiry and private judgment in all cases, all subjects, all cases, means not just those where a moral law could be violated. James Madison referred to Martin Luther as a man who led the way in distinguishing between what is due to Caesar, the state, a professional body, etc., and what is due God. This transaction with God being that space that no government can enter and throw its weight around in. Madison is talking about Luther's inability to deny what his heart, his conscience, as the framers understood it, told him was true. And what's the situation? Luther's understanding of the meaning of Scripture. He read the words as saying what he sees they say. And he had to stand by his reading, not the Pope's. Well, this is not a man's judgment of good and evil, as that professor I quoted told you. It is a man's judgment of true and false. Affirming the truth of what you see in your heart to be true is also a thing that is due to God, not just avoidance of guilt. And that is exactly what Jefferson said. Almighty God hath created the mind free and manifested his supreme will, that free it shall remain in making judgments, by making it altogether insusceptible of restraint. Caesar can ask you to hand over his coin, the slug with his face on it, but he cannot tell you how to think and what conclusions to reach. Conscience, as the framers understood it, is not a little thing that occasionally kicks in when you enter a zone of potential wrongdoing. Conscience in Scripture, one of the sources of the founders, is not restricted to suneidesis, which is consciousness of guilt. It is the authority within, which is the meaning of the Old Testament lave, heart, a meaning carried over the New Testament heart, cardia. And other scholars get this. Conscience, in this sense, is the light and guide for our whole moral and religious life, and not only the judge and witness of our actions. This is the heart, the center of a man, where everything is decided, and it is a private domain. This is your property, given to you by God. And every man is answerable to the dictates of his heart, not just the religious, and not just in respect of the moral law, rather with regard to everything judged by, as we would put it, the mind. The framers here, Adams and Madison and Jefferson, and I've given you more quotations in your program, have a much deeper understanding of what a human being is than we get from those academics who have foolishly reduced conscience to verdicts of right and wrong, and the option of taking some deeply held personal position. There's no option here. Everybody does this all the time, and everyone needs the protection from tyranny that you are asking for. If your opponents have it for their beliefs, and they do, you should have it for yours. What the framers meant by conscience was not just consciousness of guilt and not a possession of the religious, as all your opponents will understand. No institution could interfere with Luther's beliefs and force him to assent to an understanding of Christianity that he believed was wrong. No institution could force Galileo to deny what he could not help but believe about the data he had gathered. This is something that everyone in America fully understands. You don't have to say a word to convince them of this. Your secularizing moves, which will fail, are entirely unneeded. So what is the answer to our question? Stand up for the very tradition of liberty of conscience that is so distinctive of America and that every liberal adores. What the framers are all saying in unison when they talk about freedom of conscience in discussions that explain the meaning of the First Amendment is that the state has no business in the space of your conscience deciding anything for you. Your heart is yours. As the framers said, given to you by God. You're free to believe that too. The framers were elaborating an extraordinary idea of America as a home for real human beings who decide in their own hearts and minds what is true and false, about everything, all subjects. What is true about Scripture and salvation, about Baptists and Catholics, about tyranny, about what is right and what is wrong, about marriage, about health care, everything. You have freedom to think, to have the right to hold a bigger conception of women's health than the HHS. And you don't have to prove that it is correct. I understand Douglas Laycock correctly. He has said, and I agree, that the Obama administration has violated the First Amendment by punishing some of those decisions as if you did not have the right to make them. Laycock has said repeatedly that never before in American history have we attempted to make illegal, under any circumstances, well-known core religious practices of the largest religious groups in the country. With respect to the contraception mandate and with respect to same-sex marriage, we have made, in certain contexts, illegal the practices of nearly half the population of Catholics and evangelicals. That's new. That's unprecedented. I myself would alter this on one point with regard to medicine. Religious practices, is that the best way to put it? No, free thought. You're being punished for thinking as Americans, for thinking as people do, morally, philosophically, scientifically, and then doing what anyone would do who thought that way. And it's not just Catholics and evangelicals. The First Amendment protects and has been understood to protect your freedom to decide what is true. Until that day when Congress legislates state pragmatism or federal postmodernism and the American experiment is over, no law or regulation can compel you to ignore your straightforward understanding of the facts of embryology. And I invoke not religion here, but Galileo, gathering the data and putting two and two together and facts of embryology. Nothing can compel you to ignore your straightforward understanding of the facts of embryology, which leads you to the conclusion, a conclusion you might reach not in accord with any religious belief at all, as far as I can see, but just by the golden rule. Though you're free to reach this conclusion, say the framers, by a religious route too. Nothing can stop you from concluding that abortion and emergency contraception kill the innocent and are therefore wrong. Only when the state can tell its citizens how they must think will that decision and the actions that follow from it not be yours to make. In my view, you are suffering a violation not of religion, which not everyone shares with you, but indeed of your First Amendment right, which I have tried to reacquaint you with. Look at it again. It protects the way you think, which everyone does along with you. If you are free to think, to reach your own conclusions. Why? Because governments do not know the answer. That means that governments have to take seriously the implications of the conclusions that citizens reach. Governments don't know better because governments don't know anything. In America, people do the thinking. If you have reached the conclusion that involvement with abortion and emergency contraception is involvement with premeditated killing, that you should have to leave medicine for reaching that conclusion is a violation of what America stands for. This then is the answer to your question. What to do? Remind people what liberty of conscience in your tradition has meant. In that tradition of American thought that every American so gratefully accepts. As a Canadian, I envy you this legacy. It's important for all of us that America still works.